Was he a genius or a criminal? George Remus, a lawyer with deep knowledge of pharmacy and law, built a billion-dollar bootlegging empire by bending the system. His dramatic flair earned him the nickname, the Napoleon of the Chicago Bar. His story is filled with betrayal, madness, and murder, and may have even inspired the Great Gatsby. Ready to uncover the real man behind the myth? George Remus was born in Germany in 1876, but moved with his family to Chicago when he was just 5 years old. Unlike many immigrant stories of struggle, Remus showed early promise. By his teenage years, George Remus had stepped up as the family's main provider after his father was left unable to work. Driven by determination and ambition, he took a job at a pharmacy and went on to become a licensed pharmacist by the age of 19. But Remus had no plans to limit himself to this, as he had bigger dreams. While working as a pharmacist, he went to night school to study law, and in 1900, he passed the Illinois bar exam. That was the start of his career as a criminal defense attorney. Remus quickly gained a reputation as a talented and dramatic lawyer. His courtroom performances were legendary, as he would weep, faint, and even pound tables to sway juries. This even earned him the nickname, the Napoleon of the Chicago Bar. For nearly 2 decades, Remus built a successful legal career defending the accused. Ironically, many of his clients were murderers. His understanding of both pharmacy and law would later serve him well in ways he couldn't have imagined. But it wasn't until the enactment of a controversial law that George Remus would find his true calling and the path to immense wealth. January 17, 1920, marked the beginning of a new era in American history as Prohibition officially began. The 18th Amendment and the Volstead Act made it illegal to make, sell, or move alcoholic drinks anywhere in the United States. Most saw this as a restriction, but George Remus, he was different. He saw this as an opportunity. As a lawyer, Remus had defended bootleggers and observed their operations. He noticed that many were making significant profits despite inefficient methods. With his legal knowledge, he spotted something others missed: a loophole in the Volstead Act that allowed alcohol to be produced for medicinal purposes. And of course, his experience as a former pharmacist only helped Remus understand this industry deeply. In 1920, Remus sold his law practice, gathered his savings, and moved to Cincinnati, Ohio. But why Cincinnati? Well, this location was strategic because 80% of America's bonded whiskey was stored within a 300-mile radius of Cincinnati. It also shared a border with Kentucky, where many of the nation's largest distilleries were located. This helped Remus purchase distilleries and pharmaceutical companies at a rapid pace. His method was brilliant. He would legally buy distilleries and obtain permits to withdraw whiskey for medicinal purposes. The whiskey would then be hijacked by Remus's own men while in transit to his pharmaceutical companies. The stolen whiskey ended up on the black market, sold for huge profits. At the same time, Remus claimed insurance money for the missing shipments. On paper, he looked like a victim of theft, but in truth, he was running the whole plan, making money from both the illegal sales and the insurance payouts. It was a perfect scheme that gave him both legal protection and illegal profits. By 1921, Remus owned 13 distilleries and was making enough whiskey to supply a big part of the illegal alcohol market in the United States. He built a huge delivery system that reached many states. In just 2 years, George Remus made around $40 million. That would be more than $500 million today. George Remus didn't just become wealthy, he became glamorously rich. He purchased a magnificent estate in Cincinnati called Price Hill. The 60-acre property featured tennis courts, a swimming pool, and even a man-made lake. The mansion itself was renovated with imported marble, exotic hardwoods, and the finest furnishings money could buy. But did you know Remus threw some of the wildest parties at his place? Remus's parties became the stuff of legend. Unlike other bootleggers who operated in the shadows, Remus flaunted his wealth with spectacular gatherings. In fact, many literary scholars believe Remus was the primary inspiration for the character of J. Gatsby. At one particularly famous party in 1923, Remus gifted each of his 100 guests a new car. For the women, he included diamond bracelets in the glove compartments. At the center of Remus's lavish lifestyle was his wife, Imogene. He had divorced his first wife to marry the beautiful and much younger Imogene Holmes in 1920. Remus was infatuated with her, showering her with jewelry, furs, and a fleet of cars. Imogene embraced the role of a bootlegger's wife, becoming his trusted confidant and social director. But always remember, the higher one rises, the harder the fall. Even as Remus enjoyed the pinnacle of his success, forces were aligning against him. The federal government, embarrassed by his dodging of prohibition laws, was determined to bring him down. And closer to home, betrayal was brewing in a form he never expected. By 1922, Remus had become too big and too visible to ignore. The Bureau of Prohibition, under the leadership of Assistant Attorney General Mabel Walker Willebrandt, targeted Remus as part of a broader crackdown on high-profile bootleggers. In 1923, after a lengthy investigation, federal agents arrested Remus and 25 members of his organization on charges of thousands of prohibition law violations. Remus's trial was a media sensation. After his arrest, the story quickly grabbed headlines. Despite representing himself with the same charm that had once made him a successful defense attorney, the evidence against him was overwhelming. In 1924, he was sentenced to 2 years in the federal penitentiary in Atlanta, Georgia. Even in prison, Remus maintained his connections and comforts. He was assigned to the Millionaires' Row section of the prison, where wealthy inmates get special privileges. He continued to direct his bootlegging empire from behind bars, confident that his fortune and business would be awaiting him upon his release. To manage his affairs during this tough time, Remus entrusted everything to his wife, Imogene. He signed over all his properties and assets to her name, assuming their relationship was built on mutual trust and devotion. He was betrayed by the one person he loved the most. Here comes the twist in the story. While Remus was in prison, his wife Imogene started a relationship with Franklin Dodge, a prohibition agent who had helped investigate Remus. But it wasn't just an affair. Imogene and Dodge began selling off Remus's distilleries, properties, and whiskey. They moved millions of dollars into secret accounts and planned to leave Remus, take his money, and disappear. When Remus began hearing rumors of his wife's actions, he initially dismissed them as prison gossip. But as evidence mounted through loyal friends who visited him, this hard truth became clear. The woman he had loved and trusted was stealing everything he had built. Even worse, Imogene had allegedly hired hitmen to ensure Remus wouldn't survive to reclaim what was his. In November 1925, George Remus was released from prison after serving 24 months. He returned not to his mansion and empire, but to the ruins of his former life. Death Valley Farm had been stripped of its valuables, his business interests had been sold off, and Imogene had filed for divorce. The king of the bootleggers had been taken down not by the law, but by betrayal. For several months following his release, Remus attempted to reclaim his assets through legal channels. He filed lawsuits against Imogene and Dodge, alleging fraud and theft. But the legal process was slow, and many of his assets had been hidden or transferred beyond recovery. As he watched everything he built slip through his fingers, Remus became increasingly consumed by his wife's betrayal. Beneath his calm efforts to fight back through the courts, something darker was growing, and revenge was quietly taking root. But did you know how far Remus went to get back at his wife? The divorce proceedings between George and Imogene Remus were scheduled to be finalized on October 6, 1927. On that fateful morning, Imogene was being driven to the courthouse in Cincinnati by her daughter from a previous marriage. As their car passed through Eden Park, a vehicle pulled alongside them. It was George Remus, who had been following them. Remus forced their car off the road. In a state of panic, Imogene fled the vehicle and ran through the park, with Remus in pursuit. Witnesses described seeing a well-dressed man chasing a screaming woman through the morning mist of the park. When Remus caught up to Imogene, he pulled out a pistol and shot her in the abdomen. The murder of Imogene Remus became a national sensation. The newspapers dubbed it the crime of the decade, and the following trial captured the public's attention even more than Remus's bootlegging trial had. The case had everything: wealth, betrayal, revenge, and a once powerful man driven to desperation. Remus again chose to represent himself at trial, but this time with a different strategy. Drawing on his experience defending murderers, he pleaded temporary insanity. He claimed that the trauma of Imogene's betrayal and theft had driven him to a mental breakdown. In emotional testimony, Remus detailed how the woman he loved had stripped him of his fortune and allegedly plotted his murder. The trial lasted for several weeks, with sensational testimony about the couple's lavish lifestyle, Imogene's affair with Prohibition agent Dodge, and Remus's mental deterioration. Psychological experts testified about transitory maniacal insanity, a condition they claimed had overtaken Remus at the moment of the shooting. On December 7, 1927, after deliberating for only 19 minutes, the jury found George Remus not guilty by reason of insanity. He was committed to an asylum, but was released after just 7 months when psychiatrists declared him sane. The public largely sympathized with Remus. viewing him as a man who had been driven to the edge by an unfaithful and greedy wife. Having exacted his revenge, George Remus emerged from the asylum to face a world greatly changed from the one he had once dominated. His bootlegging empire was gone. Most of his fortune had vanished. The Roaring Twenties were reaching their conclusion, soon to be extinguished by the Great Depression. Remus attempted to rebuild his life with characteristic determination. He made efforts to re-establish himself in the bootlegging business, but the landscape had changed. Organized crime had taken over much of the illegal alcohol trade, and Remus lacked the capital to compete at his former level. When Prohibition was repealed in 1933 with the 21st Amendment, whatever opportunity remained disappeared entirely. Always adaptable, Remus turned to legitimate businesses. He invested in real estate and operated a few small companies in the Cincinnati area. While he achieved modest success, he never regained anything close to his former wealth and prominence. The man who once hosted parties where guests received new cars as party favors now lived a relatively modest middle-class existence. Despite his reduced circumstances, Remus maintained his larger-than-life personality. He remained a colorful local character in Cincinnati, known for his distinctive habit of referring to himself in the third person. Remus is pleased to meet you. Remus thinks this is excellent whiskey. Remus knows what the ladies like. This suggested that he still viewed himself as a figure of importance. Remus's legal knowledge continued to serve him well in his later years. He successfully fought off numerous lawsuits related to his previous activities and even won some cases against those who had defrauded him. His mind remained sharp, even as his relevance to the changing American landscape diminished. In his final years, Remus lived quietly with his longtime housekeeper, whom he eventually married. He occasionally gave interviews about the Prohibition era, speaking with nostalgia and a hint of bitterness about the empire he had built and lost. To young reporters, he was a living relic of an already mythologized time in American history. George Remus died of natural causes in 1952 at the age of 77. His death received modest coverage in the newspapers, noting his colorful past, but acknowledging that most Americans had forgotten the man who once rivaled Al Capone in wealth and notoriety. He was buried in a Cincinnati cemetery, far from the mausoleum he had once planned for himself during the height of his success. In death, George Remus found something he couldn't get in his final years: renewed relevance. As scholars and writers began examining the Prohibition era more closely, Remus's story emerged as one of the most compelling narratives of the period. His rise and fall exemplified the opportunities, excesses, and dangers of the noble experiment that was Prohibition. Among the many legacies of his larger-than-life persona, perhaps the most intriguing is the possibility that George Remus inspired one of literature's most iconic characters. Do you think the real J. Gatsby has been a bootlegger named Remus? The similarities are hard to miss. More and more literary historians believe that F. Scott Fitzgerald based the character of J. Gatsby on Remus. The two have a lot in common. Both made their own fortunes through illegal activities, through lavish parties, had unique ways of speaking, and were driven by love for a woman. When Remus's murder trial was all over the news, Fitzgerald was living nearby in New York, so it's likely he knew about Remus's story. In recent decades, Remus has been featured in books, documentaries, and television series about Prohibition. The HBO series Boardwalk Empire included a character based on Remus, introducing his story to new generations. His mansion, Death Valley Farm, became a tourist attraction in Cincinnati before being demolished in the 1960s. Beyond pop culture, Remus's legal cases established important precedents in American law. His murder trial remains a frequently cited example in discussions of the insanity defense. The techniques used by federal prosecutors to build their bootlegging case against him influenced future prosecutions of organized crime figures. Remus's story continues to resonate because it contains so many quintessentially American themes: immigrant success, entrepreneurial ingenuity, fabulous wealth, passionate love, bitter betrayal, violent revenge, and ultimate downfall. It's a narrative that feels both specific to the Prohibition era and timeless in its human drama. Perhaps most significantly, Remus's life illustrates the unintended consequences of Prohibition. Far from creating a more virtuous society, the alcohol ban created opportunities for spectacular criminal enterprises and corruption. It turned ordinary citizens into lawbreakers and transformed some lawbreakers into millionaires. Few exemplified this transformation more dramatically than George Remus, who exploited the very laws he had once upheld as an attorney. In this sense, Remus wasn't merely a product of his time, rather he was a creation of a flawed social experiment. His story serves as a cautionary tale about the limits of legislation to control human behavior and the unforeseen opportunities that arise when popular demands clash with legal restrictions. George Remus lived many lives in one. He went from being an immigrant to a pharmacist, then to a criminal defense attorney, and later became known as the king of the bootleggers. He rose from being a millionaire to a prisoner, from a betrayed husband to a man found not guilty of murder. What would you have done in Remus's position? When betrayed by those closest to you, where is the line between justice and revenge? Let us know in the comments, and if you found this historical journey fascinating, don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories.